Welcome to Healing Through Hair Loss, the podcast where we talk about the roller coaster ride of hair loss and our healing journey. If you or someone you love is dealing with hair loss, please subscribe to this podcast. The goal of this podcast is to be a voice of support to people dealing with hair loss due to alopecia. Welcome to today's episode of Healing Through Hair Loss. My name is Cindy, and in today's episode, I'm going to talk to you about talking to kids about alopecia. I feel like this is an important topic to talk about for a few different reasons. One, because if you are going through alopecia yourself and you have kids, you might be struggling with how to tell them about what you are going through. And the way you talk to your kids about this could be different depending on how old your kids are. If your kids are younger, preschool to younger elementary school age, the conversation might be different from the conversation that I had with my kids who are middle school and high school age. They understand things differently. So I'll tell you how I have discussed alopecia with my kids, but also how I've discussed it with my nieces and nephews who are older. And honestly, there really hasn't been a whole lot of discussion to be had. The younger kids know that I'm bald and that I have wigs, and they don't really ask why. They just kind of think, oh, look at that. You have a whole lot of different hairstyles. And they go on about their day. So let me just start by telling you a little bit about my journey when I started losing my hair and how I talked to my kids about it. So at the time of my initial hair loss, my son was 10 years old and my daughter was 15. And they knew I was very open and honest with them from the very beginning. They knew when I developed my first bald spot, and they saw the progression of my hair rapidly falling out. So the way I talked to them about it was by basically just being open and honest about the emotions that went along with it. They saw me going through sad days. They saw me going through my depression. And the reason I felt like it was important to be honest about it is because it's real life. And I never want to shelter my kids from real life because the way I see it is our kids, especially as they get to be an older age, they need to be able to look to us as parents as role models to see how we handle things. And if we handle things in a healthy way or a not so healthy way. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that the way I handled my hair loss was perfect every day. Far from it. But I will say that I don't feel like I ever went off the deep end at any point. So when I first started losing my hair and I developed my first bald spot, I just told them, look at this. I have a bald spot. Isn't that weird? And yeah, they thought it was weird. They're like, wow, what happened? And, I was honest with them. I told them, I was like, I don't know. I don't know what's causing it. And I went to the doctor and the doctor just basically told me that I might have a vitamin D and iron deficiency that might have caused it, but she wasn't quite sure. There was no real confirmation. And so I told my kids that, I told my husband what was going on. We were very open in communication with what was happening. And as my hair progressed and I lost more and more and more, there were points when I lost so much of my hair, so much of my hair that it did become scary. It did. And I did at that point, I did not want to scare my kids on a daily basis because I was scared. And so I started wearing beanie caps more around the house. I started covering up what was going on a little bit more because it was terrifying. It really was. I won't sugarcoat that for a moment. It was really terrifying, especially to know that I still didn't know what was causing it to fall out so rapidly. And so at that point, I quit talking to my kids about it as much because I didn't want to freak them out. But after I shaved my head, that's when I became more open about it again. Because by that time, I had gone to a dermatologist and been diagnosed with alopecia areata. And so I felt a little bit better knowing that there wasn't something deathly wrong with me because there were points when I was going through this, when I didn't have a diagnosis, I didn't know about alopecia, that I really thought that there was something like deathly wrong with me. There were times when I would question my sanity and think, oh my God, maybe I do have cancer, or maybe I have been exposed to something deadly. What, there's something crazy wrong with me. And so there were moments when I really questioned a lot about myself to the point that I didn't want to talk to my kids about all of the crazy thoughts that were going on in my head. They didn't need to know all that. So after I got my alopecia areata diagnosis, I talked to them about that and explained to them what I knew about alopecia and how my body is reacting and what my immune system is doing in a way that they understood, and they seemed to comprehend it pretty well at their age. And when I shaved my head, they knew what was going on. I mean, they were in the house when I shaved my head. My husband helped me shave my head. I talk about that in a previous episode if you want to go back and listen to that. After I came out of the bathroom, my head was nice and shaved. I went to each of the kids and was like, "Look at this. Here I am." And there was a bit of initial shock. There's that initial shock of, wow, mom's bald now. That's kind of crazy. But once the initial shock wore off, it was just normal. It was the new normal for us. And as I started wearing wigs, that became the new normal. They would laugh with me with about some of the wigs that I got because some of them were pretty terrible. Like the first few wigs that I got that I tried on, they were pretty terrible. But some of them were really awesome. And so it was a lot of fun to go through that with my kids and sort of find the lighter and fun side of alopecia. And then as I progressed to alopecia universalis, the new fears came back around of, wow, okay, I went from having just a bald head to bald everywhere. And so that was a little scary again. And then that fear wore off again. And I found a new normal again. And the kids just accepted it with me. And it's been an interesting journey with them, talking to them about it, because they are so kind and resilient. And I'm so thankful that they have accepted where I am and they don't make fun of me and they just have a bald mom, and that's okay. Now, when it comes to talking to their friends about it, I am a little more cautious there because I am mindful to not open up a can of worms where my kids are going to get bombarded by questions from their friends. So I'm mindful of that. I kind of take baby steps into which kids I expose to my alopecia. For example, with my son who's in middle school, I so far have only let his friends know about my condition who I personally know their parents and I'm friends with their parents, and their parents know about what I'm going through. And the reason I am a little more cautious about this is just because when kids are in middle school, they're already dealing with enough social pressures as it is, just with themselves. Do I look good enough? Do I smell good enough? Am I, making the right grades? Am I fitting in with the right groups? There's so many social pressures with middle school kids that I try to be mindful of that with my son because I don't want him to get teased at school for having a bald mom. That's the last thing I want. And there are mean kids, and mean kids will say mean things. So that's why I'm more cautious around his friends. Now, my high school kid, on the other hand, I'm not quite as cautious just because my high school kid is totally different from her brother. She's very much a I'm going to march to the beat of my own drum kind of kid, take it or leave it. And so she doesn't care as much about the social pressures. And all of her friends who have seen me bald when they've come over for sleepovers and things like that, they've been super cool about it. They're just like, "Look at that, you're bald." And they can kinda laugh with me about my wigs, and they're just they've been really chill and laid back about it. So that's how I've dealt with things with my kids personally. Now with younger kids, it's a little different. I was a little concerned about how my younger nieces and nephews would respond. I have at least the nieces and nephews who were old enough to comprehend that, hey, you don't have any hair as young as 2 years old. I've been cautious with them, but I think they know and understand that I'm bald. When they come over to our house and see wigs lined up on my dresser. They're like, "Wow, you have a lot of different hairs." And it's really kind of cute to see and hear them talk about it. But I really just keep it simple with them. They don't ask a lot of questions, partially maybe because their parents have talked to them about it ahead of time. But I think part of it could just be that they just don't care. They're kids. They're not sitting around thinking about why I'm bald. They're just ready to go play outside. And so it's easy to keep it simple with younger kids, especially if it's not your own kids, because they are just ready to move on to the next thing. they're not ready to talk about the big conversations about your immune system. So I've really just kept it simple with them. They know that I wear wigs and they know that I might look different every time they see me, and they're cool with that. It's just another thing. So my advice talking to younger kids is just keep it simple. If they have questions, answer them as honest and gently as you can. And don't get offended if little kids say something that could hurt your feelings if, say, an adult said those things. Just keep it light, would be my best advice for talking to younger kids about it. And talking to older kids about it, just keep it real. I mean, kind of gauge where each kid is in their life and their ability to understand and comprehend what's going on, and just go with your gut and go with your heart. And honestly, I think the more that we open up the conversation about alopecia, the better. And the more kids understand about it, it will help them if they ever encounter anyone at school who has alopecia. So I think they will become a kinder person at school and know how to treat that person at school with dignity and respect, because that's all anyone deserves. So I will end this episode by thanking you so much for listening. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate anyone who listens to this podcast. And just remember that you are beautiful and you are worthy of love no matter where you're at in this journey.
Thanks for listening to the Healing Through Hair Loss podcast. Be sure to visit healingthroughhairlosspodcast.com to join the conversation, access the show notes, and sign up for our newsletter to get access to fantastic bonus content.